Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom Hamishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Thursday? Yehud in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Bell in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Shandor in the Bronx, Lorraine in Texas, Bell in Texas. I love this music. Shalom class. Thanks always, Sal and Nina. Am Yisrael Chai. Amen. Helena from Finland, who has been here since day one of this class. Great to see you, Helena. Melissa in Great Neck, New York. Bill in Mid-Missouri. My car has been in the shop for some major repairs, but it's back and I'm mobile again. Thanks be to God. Amen. And may you always be mobile. Lucy in Minnesota. Chaim in Florida. Ella. Frank in San Pedro, Marjorie in Georgia, Marie in Freeport. Welcome, everybody. Continuing the sage's analysis of Job from the book of Job. We've been working our way through this discussion here, which is part of Mishna number 5, the Gemara of Mishna number 5 here in chapter 1 of Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. The Mishnah was talking about co-owners, partners, dividing a courtyard or a garden or a field where one wants to divide and one doesn't. And they can force the division as long as the resulting halves would still have enough size so that they could still be considered, by the same name that they had before, that it's still a courtyard, that it's still a field, that it's still a garden. But if the partners inherited, let's say two brothers inherited a scroll of scripture, one of the books of the Bible, they could not divide that in half because it would be disrespectful to that scroll of scripture. And then once we got into scripture and scrolls and the books of the Bible and what order they should come in, we eventually landed on the book of Job, and we're continuing this discussion. So Rava interpreted a verse homiletically from Job 29:13. He says, what is the meaning of that which is written when Job is saying about himself, quote, the blessing of him that was lost came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. In Job 29:13. We're going to be taking a bunch of verses from Job out of context. But we remember the general story was that Job was an extremely righteous guy. God actually pointed to him, said, and he's so righteous that even if you're talking about the most righteous person who ever lived, Abraham, you should consider Job in that class. And this was in a conversation when the Satan comes and challenges God and says, this guy that you point to, he's very righteous, but would he be so righteous if he lost all these abundant blessings that you've showered upon him? And God said, well, go find out, test him. And then, Job was stricken with a severe penalty. I mean, he just lost everything in a very short amount of time, and he did remain righteous. But I mean, the whole book is about him having a conversation with his friends. Some of the friends saying, well, so much bad befell you, must be that you did something wrong. And he protests. He says, I didn't do anything wrong. And in very colorful language, this kind of conversation goes back and forth, as they speculate on why a righteous man was stricken with such severe curses. So, Rav is now going to interpret when Job says about himself, the blessing of him that was lost came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. So, about the verse, or the phrase, the blessing of him that was lost upon me, this teaches that Job used to steal a field from orphans. Wait, are we saying that Job is righteous? Now, are we gonna sort of side with the friends who said, no, if all this evil befell you, it must be that you did something wrong? And we're gonna look into Job's behavior and his statements and say, oh, really, he must have committed some big sins, like he stole a field from orphans. But actually, steal is an odd word to use in this context, because what this teaches is that Job used to steal a field from orphans, cultivate it, improve it, and then return it to them. Consequently, they would bless him for the field that they had lost. They thought it was lost, but in fact it was returned to them, and it was returned to them much better than how they found it. And about the verse, or the phrase, I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy, this teaches that anywhere that there was a widow whom no one would marry, Job would go and cast his name upon her, i.e., he would start a rumor that she was related to him. And then somebody would come forward and marry her because everybody wanted to be related to Job, since he was, reputed to be a man of such high moral and financial standing that everybody wanted to be related to him. Now, Job further said, quote, "Oh, that my vexation were thoroughly weighed and my calamity laid in the balances." That's Job 6:2. So Rav says, dust should be put in the mouth of Job, meaning he should not have spoken in such a manner, as if he were weighing his deeds against those of God, right? In other words, he's saying this calamity has fallen on me, but if you weigh my deeds, my deeds would suggest, right, would prove that whatever has befallen me, I didn't deserve it, right? So since all outcomes come from heaven, the fact that he's suffering in this way means that God did something wrong, right? That might be what he's saying. He didn't say that directly, but at least you could make such an inference from what he said. And therefore, Rav is saying he shouldn't have said that. He shouldn't have said something that could even be misinterpreted like that. Meaning he should not have spoken in such a manner as if he were weighing his deeds against those of God. May one act as if he is in a friendship with heaven. And similarly, Job said, there is no arbiter between us. Who may lay his hand upon us both? That's Job 9:33. So Rav says, dust should be put in the mouth of Job for saying this statement. Is there a servant who rebukes his master? Job also said, I have made a covenant with my eyes. Why then should I look upon a virgin? Job 31:1. Presumably he's saying, I never cast my eyes in an inappropriate direction. But Rava says, dust should be put in the mouth of Job for saying this statement. He did not look at other women, but Abraham did not even look at his own wife, as it is written. What do you mean Abraham never looked at his wife? He was married to Sarah for so many years, he never looked at her? Why would you say such a thing? Well, Genesis 12:11, it is written, now I know that you are a beautiful woman. Right, so this is when they were going down into Egypt because of the drought in Canaan. And as they're going to go down into Egypt to survive the drought, he's saying, I know you are a beautiful woman. And, they're going to try and kill me because of you. So let's pretend that we're brother and sister rather than husband and wife. But why did he say, now I know that you are a beautiful woman? Right? The logical thing would have been to say, you are a beautiful woman, therefore. Why does he say, now I know you are a beautiful woman? So one may learn by inference that initially he did not know how beautiful she was because he had not gazed at her. Right? He didn't gaze at his wife in any kind of inappropriate way to really, sort of view her the way that the, sexually immoral Egyptians would look at her. Job further said, as the cloud is consumed and vanishes away, so he who goes down to the grave shall come up no more. That's Job 7:9. Rava says, from here it may be inferred that Job denied the resurrection of the dead, as he said that one who goes down to the grave will not come up and live again, just as a cloud that dissipates will not return. And he also stated, quote, he crushes me with a tempest and multiplies my wounds without cause, Job 9:17. And Rabbah says Job blasphemed with mention of a tempest, and he was answered with mention of a tempest. How so? Job blasphemed with mention of a tempest, Biseara, as it is written, he crushes me with a tempest, meaning that Job said before God, Master of the universe, perhaps a tempest passed before you, and you confused Iyov is how we say Job in Hebrew, Iyov, with Oyav, which is the word for enemy. Meaning, perhaps, God, you got caught up in a storm and, you made a mistake and you confused me, Iyov, with an enemy of you, with some enemy of yours, and where the word is Oyav, like Iyov and Oyav is similar. So maybe God made a mistake and he just sent these curses at the wrong person. Obviously, that would be blasphemy because God knows very well. So Job was answered with a tempest. As it is written, then the Lord answered Job out of the tempest and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now your loins like a man, for I will demand of you, and let me know your answer. That's Job 38, verses 1 through 3. Now, what is the meaning that God spoke out of the tempest? God said to Job, I have created many hairs, nimin. I've created many hairs on a human, and for each hair, I created its own follicle through which the hair is sustained, so that two hairs should never draw from one follicle. As were two hairs to draw from one follicle, they would impair a man's vision. Now, if I do not confuse one follicle of hair with another on any given person of the billions of people, would I confuse Iyov with Oyav? The Hebrew word for tempest, sa'ara, is phonetically identical to the Hebrew word for hair. So that's why they're bringing in this example. I mean, obviously God, he created all the pebbles, all the grains of sand, all the leaves, and, despite everything that God created billions of, all the stars, God wouldn't confuse any two of them. So why use the example of two hairs? He doesn't confuse two hairs just because that word is so similar to this tempest. Now, God further said to Job, who has divided a channel, ta'ala, a channel? Who has divided a channel for the torrent of rain, or a path for the lightning of thunder? That's Job 38:25. So says God, I have created many drops of water in the clouds, and for each drop I created its own channel, so that two drops should not emerge from the same channel. As were two drops to emerge from the same channel, they would destroy the earth, and it would not yield produce. So now, if I do not confuse one raindrop with another, would I confuse Iyov with Oyav? Meaning, again, they're sort of explaining it in detail, kind of extending the metaphor into a very sharp level of detail. But the point is, Job is saying, why would you visit all these curses on me? I didn't do anything wrong. I lived a righteous life. You must have been confused, God. And God is saying, yeah, I don't confuse anything. There's a reason. You don't understand it, but you didn't create the world. You haven't been running the world for billions of years. So, tough luck you don't understand it. I, God, understand it. Incidentally, the Gemara asks, from where may it be inferred that this term ta'ala means a channel? And Rabbah Bar Shela said, as it is written with regard to Elijah the prophet. And he fashioned the channel, ta'ala, about the altar as great as would contain 2 sah of seed. Presumably this is in the incident where Elijah challenges the priests of the Baal to a contest, and they are obviously all phonies. And they're not able to, bring fire from heaven to ignite their offerings. Then Elijah has, a cow brought, and then he soaks it with buckets and buckets of water in the midst of a drought, and then calls on God to make fire appear, and God does. And then everyone understands that the prophets of this idol are false, and I think they all get killed that day. And it was a triumphant day for the forces of good. Now, the second half of this aforementioned verse in Job states, or a path for the lightning of thunder, which is interpreted as follows. God said, I have created many thunderclaps in the clouds, and for each and every thunderclap, I created its own path, so that 2 thunderclaps should not issue forth from the same path. As were 2 thunderclaps to issue from the same path, they would destroy the world. And now, if I do not confuse one thunderclap with another, would I confuse Iyov with Oyav? It is further stated there, do you know when the wild goats of the rock give birth? Can you mark when the hinds do calve? Job 39:1. This goat is cruel to her young and shows them no pity. When she squats to give birth, she ascends to the top of a mountain so that the kids should fall down from her and die. And I summon her, an eagle that receives it with his wings and places it before her. And if the eagle reached her 1 moment early or was 1 moment late, the kid would immediately die. Now, if I do not confuse 1 moment with another moment, would I confuse Iyov with Oyav? Now we're on page 16b. Again, God's in command. God is in total command, and he's just giving lots of examples of it. And they, again, meaning that he had a reason to let the Satan visit all this evil on Job. And he does that, and God doesn't have to explain himself. You just have to trust that the one who makes the whole world function constantly, despite, an unfathomable amount of complexity in the world, and it functions beautifully, trust God. Similarly, we just did that. Now the Gemara comments, on the one hand, the text states, Job has spoken without knowledge and his words were without wisdom. This is Job 34:35. But on the other hand, it is written with regard to Job's friends, you have not spoken of me the thing that is right, like my servant Job. So Rava said, from here may be inferred that a person is not held responsible for what he says when he is in distress. Although Job uttered certain words that were wrong and inappropriate, he was not punished for them because he said them at a time of pain and hardship, right? Job went through this whole speculation, why did this happen to me? And Rava and a few of the other sages are saying he shouldn't have said the things that he said. It would be wrong for us to say such things, and we should resist saying them even when we're in distress. But the fact is, Job, went through this test, suffered terribly, but at the end of the book, everything is restored to him. I mean, sadly, his family that died, they are not brought back, but he, was blessed with a new and even bigger family, and everything else was returned to him. So the verse states, and Job's 3 friends heard all of this evil that was come upon him. They came, every one, from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, and Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, for they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. That's Job 2:11. Now, what does they had made an appointment together mean? Rav Yehuda says that Rav says the phrase teaches that they all entered through one gate at the same time. And a sage taught in a Baraisa, there were 300 parasangs between each and every one of them, i.e. each one lived 300 parasangs away from the other, scale of 300 miles apart, which is a big distance in those days when you had to walk everywhere. So the Gemara asks, how did they all know at the same time what had happened to Job so that the 3 of them came together? There are those who say that they each had a crown which displayed certain signs when something happened to one of the others. And there are, sort of like in the Lord of the Rings, they had like that stone, that you could look into it and communicate with somebody, somewhere else that had such a stone, miraculous, like a cell phone. Where they're saying that the friends of Job had such devices so that they could communicate with each other. And there are those who say that they had trees. And when the trees withered, they knew that sorrow had visited one of them. Rava said that this closeness between Job and his friends explains the adage that people say, either a friend, like the friends of Job, or death. If a person lacks close friends, he is better off dead. Right? So sometimes these friends, are criticized for saying, well, they're suggesting to Job that maybe you did something wrong. But here, where they're being used as an example of, the ideal friends, such close friends that everyone should aspire to have such close friends who come to you in your time of need and try to empathize with you. The Gemara cites another place where Job is mentioned. Quote, and it came to pass when men began to multiply, larov, on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them. Now that's back from Genesis 6:1, when there was a population surge, and eventually this is going to lead to the generation of the flood and Noah, etc. But sometime between the generation of Adam and Cain and Abel, eventually there was this proliferation of people. And it talks about this period, right, when the men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them. Now, Rabbi Yochanan says, Larov means that propagation, Revia, came to the world through these daughters, right? So these particular daughters, that generation, the girls of that generation started to have a lot of babies. Came to the world through these daughters. Reish Lakish says, strife, meriva, came to the world. Once these daughters were born, the men began to fight among themselves over them. And Reish Lakish said to Rabbi Yochanan, according to you who say that due to the daughters, propagation came to the world, for what reason were the number of Job's daughters not doubled, when at the end of the story, God doubled everything that Job had lost? Right? So at the end of the story, when he gets everything back, he gets twice as much as he had before, presumably because he passed through this period of suffering. But even though all his fields and wealth and everything was doubled, and his sons were doubled, the number of daughters was restored. It wasn't doubled, right? So if daughters are all about propagation, why weren't his daughters doubled the way his sons were? Why were they not doubled? So Rabbi Yochanan said to him, granted, the numbers of Job's daughters were not doubled in name, meaning they did not become twice as many, but they were doubled in beauty. As it is written, quote, he had also 7 sons and 3 daughters. And he called the name of the first Jemima, and the name of the second was Keziah, and the name of the third one was Keren Hapuch. That's from Job 42, verses 13 and 14. So all 3 names relate to the beauty of Job's daughters. Jemima, right, Yemima, I guess maybe some people would say in English Jemima, but it's written Yemima. In her beauty, she was similar to the day, Yom, right? So Yemima is related to Yom, and Yom means day. Keziah, her scent wafted like the Keziah tree, which is the cassia tree, which has a beautiful smell. And Keren Hapuch, in the school of Rav Shela, they say she was similar to the horn, Keren, of a keresh, an animal whose horns are particularly beautiful. So they laughed at this in the West, in Eretz Yisrael, since it is considered a blemish when a person resembles the horn of a keresh. Rather, Rav Chisda said she was like garden saffron, kekurkema derishka, which is the best of its kind. And Karen refers to a garden, and puch means ornament, as it is stated, though you enlarge your eyes with paint, puch, you beautify yourself in vain. That's a separate verse in Jeremiah. But the point is that within the names of these 3 daughters is an allusion to how beautiful they were. Now, on the subject of daughters, it is reported that a daughter was born to Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rebbe. And he was upset that he did not have a son. And his father said to him, propagation has come to the world through the birth of a daughter. It's wonderful to have a daughter. Bar Kapara said to Rebbe, your father has consoled you with a meaningless consolation. As it is taught in a Baraisa, the world cannot endure without males and females, as both are needed for the perpetuation of humanity. We know this. But, says this person, fortunate is he whose children are males, and woe to him whose children are females. And similarly, the world cannot endure without either a spice dealer whose wares are sweet-smelling, or a tanner who is engaged in a foul-smelling occupation. Fortunate is he whose occupation is a spice seller, and woe to him whose occupation is a tanner. Right? Why would they be so sexist? Okay, it was an ancient world, much more patriarchal place, but why are they being so disparaging to the birth of daughters compared to the birth of sons? There's not a note here about that. It isn't actually explained. But I would submit that in their world, a boy could grow up and be a sage, right? Because there were no female sages. They didn't become rabbis among the sages. But a daughter, did not have that possibility. And moreover, you had to pay for dowries and weddings, etc. It was not so easy in that sense. Now, the Gemara comments that this disagreement is parallel to a dispute between the Tanaim. The Torah states, and the Lord blessed Abraham with everything, bakol. So what does it mean to be blessed with everything? This is something that we mention after every meal. When we say the grace after a meal, if the meal included bread, we mention that Abraham had everything. So what does this mean? And the sages disagree about what bakol means. Rabbi Meir says the blessing is that he did not have a daughter. Rabbi Yehuda says, on the contrary, the blessing was that he had a daughter. So you can see, even in this sexist patriarchal society, there were plenty of people, who did not carry that bias. So the blessing is that he had a daughter. Others say Abraham had a daughter, and her name was Bakol. And Rabbi Lazar Hamodai says Abraham, our forefather, was so knowledgeable in astrology, which the word for this here is itztagninut, that all the kings of the east and the west would come early to his door due to his wisdom. And this is the blessing of Bakol, that he possessed knowledge which everyone needed. And Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, a precious stone hung around the neck of Abraham, our forefather, and any sick person who looked at it would immediately be healed. And when Abraham, our forefather, died, the Holy One, blessed be he, hung this stone from the sphere of the sun, which from that point on brought healing to the sick. How do we know that the sun brings healing? Abaye said this explains the adage that people say, as the day progresses, sickness is lifted. Right? Sickness is more difficult in the night, in the dark, when it's cold, when the light of day shines, when people are ill. It's good to get them some sun. Alternatively, what is the blessing of Bakol? Different interpretation. That Esav, right? Esav, Jacob and Esau. That Esau did not rebel in Abraham's lifetime. That is to say, as long as Abraham was alive, his grandson, Esau, did not sin, right? Jacob and Esau were the sons of Isaac. Isaac was the son of Abraham. So as long as their grandfather was alive, the wicked Esau did not sin. Alternatively, the blessing that Abraham received of Bakol, to have everything, what was that blessing? It's that Ishmael, right? His son, Abraham's two sons were Isaac and Ishmael. So what did it mean that Abraham was blessed in everything? It means that Ishmael repented in Abraham's lifetime. And the Gemara explains, from where do we derive that Esau did not rebel in Abraham's lifetime? As it is written, quote, and Jacob was cooking a stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was faint. Genesis 25:29. And the Baraisa taught, on that day, Abraham, our forefather, passed away. And Jacob, our forefather, prepared a lentil stew to comfort Isaac, his father, as it was customary to serve mourners lentil stew. And what is different about lentils that they, in particular, are the fare customarily offered to mourners? Well, they say in the West, meaning in Eretz Yisrael, in the name of Rabba Bar Mari, just as this lentil has no mouth, i.e. it does not have a crack like other legumes, so too a mourner has no mouth, meaning his anguish prevents him from speaking. Alternatively, just as this lentil is completely round, so too mourning comes around to the inhabitants of the world, right? That circle of life is something that we think about when we're in Shiva, when we're in mourning for a loved one, and when we visit a Shiva house, when we go comfort the mourner, it's a time we all remember that no one gets out of here alive. So, sooner or later, we all go through mourning. We lose people. And so, when you are the mourner, it's good to remember that everything will come around, and the terrible sadness you feel now, this will eventually pass and give, you'll feel better about it, right? The hole in your life may never be filled, but you won't have the acute, pain of the mourning that you're in right now. And for the one visiting the house of mourning, good to remember that eventually this will come to you. So make the most of every day, make the most of every moment that you can share with your loved ones, etc. That circle of life is something we think about in the house of the mourner, and the round lentil is a reminder of that, and that's why that's the food that mourners were fed. And the Gemara asks, so what is the practical difference between these explanations? Right, that the lentil has no crack like other legumes because mourners are silent, or that the lentil is round to remind the mourners of this circularity. What's the practical difference between these explanations? And the Gemara answers the practical difference between them is with regard to whether it is appropriate to console a mourner with eggs, which have no opening, but they are not completely round. These days, we don't feed mourners lentils, but it is customary to emerge from mourning and have an egg. The first food served to a mourner following a funeral consists of eggs or lentil stew, which are indications of mourning. Other foods may subsequently be offered. So lentils are still used, but more typically it's eggs. Rabbi Yochanan says, that wicked Esau, he committed 5 transgressions on the day that Abraham died. So the famous story, where Esau comes in from being out in the field, and he's really tired and hungry and thirsty, and he says, give me some food because I'm about to die. And Jacob, who's cooking this lentil stew, says to him, well, you're so hungry, will you give me your birthright in return for a bowl of stew? And the guy says, well, what use is it to me now if I'm going to die anyway of hunger? Yeah, take the birthright. Right? And so Esau was the firstborn, but, for the price of a bowl of stew, he gave that right, the birthright, to his brother Jacob. And the Torah even says specifically, and so he spurned the birthright. And that's why we Jews are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right? Jacob took that birthright. Now, he really should have had the birthright all along, but there was this incident. And it's that. And now what we're learning is that incident happened on the very day when Abraham died. Right? So Abraham is Isaac's father. Isaac is in deep mourning. Jacob is making a mourner's stew for him. Esau is out running around doing what? What is he doing out there? And here they're going to tell you that, well, while his grandfather was alive, he didn't feel free to go do what his impulse wanted him to do. But now that his grandfather died, he didn't wait a single day. As soon as his grandfather died, he went out and committed all the sins that he was waiting to commit. And what were they? The wicked Esau committed 5 transgressions on that day that Abraham died. He engaged in sexual intercourse with a betrothed maiden. That's adultery. He killed a person. He denied the principle of God's existence. He denied resurrection of the dead. And he despised his birthright. And the Gemara cites proof to support these charges. Esau, in Hebrew, Esav, he engaged in sexual intercourse with a betrothed maiden. As it is written here, quote, and Esau came in from the field. And it is written there with regard to rape of a betrothed maiden, for he found her in a field. That's Deuteronomy 22:27. That same phrase, in a field, when it's talking about, that she was raped and she couldn't do anything about it, that in a field, is that same phrase is used for Esau coming in from the field. And so they're making that linkage. The second sin, he killed a person, as it is written here, and he was faint. And it is written there, woe is me, for my soul faints before the slayers, Jeremiah 4:31. And he denied the principle of God's existence, as it is written here, what profit is this to me? Esau said those words specifically. And it is written there, this is my God, and I will glorify him, Exodus 15:2. So when he questioned the profit of this, he was challenging the assertion that this is my God. And he denied resurrection of the dead, as it is written, behold, I am at the point of death, indicating that he did not believe in resurrection after death. And he despised the birthright, as it is written, and Esau despised the birthright, Genesis 25:34. And from where do we derive that Ishmael repented in Abraham's lifetime? From the incident involving Ravina and Rav Chama bar Buzi, who were sitting before Rava, and Rava was dozing while they were talking. So Ravina said to Rav Chama bar Buzi, is it true that you say that any death with regard to which the word gevia, meaning expire, is mentioned in the Bible, this is the death of the righteous. And Rav Chama bar Buzi said to him, yes. For example, quote, and Isaac expired, vayigva, which is the same word as gevia. And Isaac expired and died. That's Genesis 35:29. So Ravina objected. But with regard to the generation of the flood, it states, and all flesh expired, vayigva. Right? So why did they expire? They were certainly not the righteous. They were so unrighteous that God destroyed them all with a flood. So how can you say that this word expired, vayigva, implies that the person who expired had led a righteous life? Yes, and so Rav Chama bar Buzi said to him, well, we say this only when both gevia and asifa, meaning gathering, are used. When these two terms are mentioned together, they indicate the death of a righteous person. In other words, when Abraham died, it says, and Abraham expired and died, and he was gathered unto his people. So that's what gathered, right? Gathered. In other words, like the souls of his family, righteous souls in his family, came to escort him to the next world. If you've heard me tell the story of seeing my grandmother's soul leave this world, I was at her bedside when she died, and I'm not going to go into the whole story now, but if you've heard me tell it, I somehow miraculously was given a moment, the opportunity to see her soul, about to leave this world. And my grandfather, who I recognize from photographs, and who had died 53 years earlier than my grandmother, he was murdered in the Holocaust, and then he came to welcome her, and then they left together. So for me, it's like very, very, I get the image of gathered unto your people. It means that one of your people comes to escort you unto your people in the world of souls when you leave this world. And so that's what he's saying here, that when the righteous die, they have this experience, that they expire and then they are gathered. Ravina asked, but isn't there Ishmael, about whom Gevia and Asifa are written? As it is stated, Genesis 25:17, and these are the years of the life of Ishmael, and he expired and died and was gathered to his people, Genesis 25:17. Meanwhile, Rava, who had heard the discussion even in his dozing state, came fully awake and said to them, children, this is what Rabbi Yochanan says. Ishmael repented in the lifetime of his father, as it is stated, and Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him. So the fact that Ishmael allowed Isaac to precede him demonstrates that he had repented and accepted that Isaac, who was his younger brother, was going to be the one to inherit the tradition, the covenant, etc. And it's because Ishmael repented that when he died, he was considered a fully righteous person, and he had this death of the righteous. And the Gemara asks, but why is this proof? The fact that it says that when they died, right? I'm sorry, that when Abraham died, it says that Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him, right? So it should have said Ishmael and Isaac, since Ishmael was the firstborn. It says Isaac and Ishmael, so they're saying not only did Isaac inherit, right, the covenant of the Jewish people and become one of the patriarchs, but also Ishmael accepted it, right? He didn't fight against that, and that's why it says Isaac and Ishmael buried their father. And so the Gemara challenges this and says, but perhaps the verse listed them in the order of their wisdom. That is to say, perhaps, in fact, Ishmael preceded Isaac in birth, but the Torah did not list them in that order because Isaac was more accomplished in wisdom. The Gemara answers, but if that is so, consider that the verse states, and Esau and Jacob, his sons, buried him. Right, when Isaac dies, his sons Esau and Jacob bury him. Now, Jacob is the one who gets the covenant, right? And Jacob is definitely greater in wisdom than Esau. But when they come to bury Isaac, it says Esau and Jacob. Why was it that when Isaac and Ishmael came to bury Abraham, it didn't say Ishmael and Isaac, but rather Isaac and Ishmael. Rather, since Ishmael allowed Isaac to precede him, it is clear that he made Isaac his leader, and since he made him his leader, learned from it that he repented within Abraham's lifetime. Incidental to the discussion of the verse, and God blessed Abraham with everything, bakol, from Genesis 24:1, the Gemara states that the sages taught there were three people to whom the Holy One, blessed be He, gave already in this world a taste of the world to come. And they are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now we're on page 17a. Abraham, as it is written, with regard to him, quote, and the Lord blessed Abraham with everything. So everything includes not only to be prosperous and filled with meaning and joy in this world, but to even have a taste while still in this world of the world to come. Isaac, as it is written with regard to him, quote, and I have eaten from everything, Genesis 27:33. And Jacob, as it is written with regard to him, quote, because I have everything, Genesis 33:11. And this teaches that already in their lifetimes they merited everything, i.e. perfection, meaning that their soul, sort of reached a state of refinement that the rest of us will only reach when our souls depart from our bodies and return to the world of souls. Now, the Gemara continues. There were three people over whom the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, had no sway. They were not subject to the temptations of the evil inclination. And who were they? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As it is written with regard to them, respectively, with everything, from everything, everything. The completeness of their blessings means that they did not have to contend with their evil inclinations. And then there's a note here. It doesn't mean that they never had an evil inclination, but it means that they were so successful in overcoming their evil inclination that eventually God said, okay, you've proven it. I am going to, demote your evil inclination so that it's not going to be a constant struggle to overcome it. And some say that even David was not subject to his evil inclination, as it is written, quote, and my heart has died within me, from Psalm 109, meaning that the evil inclination in his heart was nullified as if his heart had died. And how does the other authority, who does not include David in his list, explain this verse? He explains that he is mentioning his travails. David means to say that his heart died within him owing to all the suffering that he endured, but he says nothing about his evil inclination. The sages taught there were six people over whom the angel of death had no sway in their demise. And they are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Right? Moses, Aaron, and Miriam were two brothers and a sister. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as it is written with regard to them respectively, with everything, from everything, and everything, since they were blessed with everything, they were certainly spared the anguish of the angel of death. This is interesting. It doesn't mean that they didn't die. We know they died, and they're buried in Hebron. So what it means, they were spared the anguish of the angel of death. It's this idea that when they died, it was with heaven's kiss. It was the most painless, and beautiful transition from this world to the next. There was no anguish in it, right? So that was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They would have had those blessings since they had all blessings. What about Moses, Aaron, and Miriam? As it is written with regard to them, they died, quote, by the mouth of the Lord. Numbers 33:38 and Deuteronomy 34:5. And this indicates that they died with a kiss and not at the hand of the angel of death. So the Gemara asks, but with regard to Miriam, it is not written by the mouth of the Lord. And Rabbi Elazar says Miriam also died with a kiss, as this is learned through a verbal analogy between the word there, mentioned in regard to Miriam, and Miriam died there, Numbers 20, verse 1, and the word there, mentioned in regard to Moses, and Moses died there, Deuteronomy 34:5. And for what reason is the phrase by the mouth of the Lord not stated with regard to Miriam? it is unseemly to mention death by a kiss with regard to a woman. The sages taught there were 7 people over whom the worm and the maggot had no sway. What does this mean? That their corpses did not decompose the way other people's decompose? There were 7 people over whom the worm and the maggot had no sway, and they are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, and Benjamin, the son of Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as it is written with regard to them, with everything from everything. Everything. Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, as it is written with regard to them, by the mouth of the Lord. And Benjamin, the son of Jacob, as it is written, and to Benjamin he said, the beloved of the Lord, he shall dwell in safety by him. The final blessing that Moses gave about Benjamin in Deuteronomy 33:12. So even in death, he rests securely, unbothered by worms. And some say that even David, right, King David, is included, as it is written, my flesh also dwells secure, from Psalm 16. And the Gemara asks, and how does the other authority who does not include David in this list explain this verse? And the Gemara answers, he is asking for mercy, that his flesh should dwell secure and not be subject to worms and maggots, but his request was denied, according to this view. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. The sages taught in a Baraisa there were 4 people who died only because of the counsel of the primordial snake, in the wake of which all humanity became mortal, and not on account of any personal sin. Right, so this is to say that had not the snake in the Garden of Eden counseled Eve, right, Hava, to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then she wouldn't have advised her husband to eat it too, and then the 2 of them would not have committed the original sin, and they would not have been punished with being mortal, right? They would have been eternal souls. Elsewhere in the Talmud we learn that Adam and Eve, they weren't humans like we're humans until they were banished from the garden. Their initial state of being was they were massive spiritual creatures the size of galaxies. But then when they showed that they couldn't be trusted, to sort of live in the supernal world, with this human free will that they had, then they were demoted to a physical life on earth, earning their bread by the sweat of their brow, etc. And so all of their descendants, right, all of us, are people, who are born and eventually die. But there's a vestige of that original sin. All of us are subject to our evil inclinations. All of us make mistakes. All of us commit transgressions, violate prohibitions, etc. We atone for that. We do our best to atone for that. But we all have some kind of sin. And that sin, which is maybe a vestige of the original sin, but all of us sin. And so no one can say when it's time to leave this world that, hey, why are you taking me? I'm blameless. Well, nobody's blameless. We've all committed some sins, and that's why we're mortal. But what we're learning here is that there were a few individuals in human history who really never sinned at all. And the only reason they died is because all humans die. But if death was associated with the end of a life that has sin in it, they wouldn't have died, right? Because they had no sin in them. And who were they? And they are Benjamin, the son of Jacob, Amram, the father of Moses, Yishai, the father of David, and Chileab, the son of David. And all these are known through tradition, except for Yishai, the father of David, with regard to whom it is written explicitly, quote, and Absalom placed Amasa over the army instead of Yoav, and Amasa was the son of a man whose name was Ithra, the Israelite, who engaged in intercourse with Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, the sister of Zeruiah, the mother of Yoav. And that's 2 Samuel 17:25. Now, this just sounds like a list of names to us, unless we're intimately familiar with Tanakh, with the Bible, as the sages were. And so they're able to spot this inconsistency. But was Abigail the daughter of Nahash? Was she not the daughter of Yishai, as it is written, and their sisters were Zeruiah and Abigail? So rather, she was called daughter of Nahash. Nahash means snake, to indicate that she was the daughter of one who died only because of the counsel of the snake, meaning she was the daughter of one who, when he lived, was utterly without sin and wouldn't have died except for the fact that humans all die because of the counsel of the snake, because of the original sin that rendered us all mortal. Okay, Bill. On another note of thankfulness, 4 years ago, I'd been attending these classes for a couple of months, but hadn't chimed in much. 4 years ago today, I got the news that my beloved Nana, who raised me, had been found by my mother and brother passed out on her living room floor. We found out in the course of events that she'd had her second stroke and had been down there for a long while. My mom and brother only happened by divine providence to decide to visit that morning. That night, I asked this community to pray for my Nana, and Sal went so far as to dedicate our learning that night. And it was late, coming out of Shabbos, so it was the die-hard class, and we dedicated the class to her healing. We lost Nana later that year to her final stroke, but I truly believe we got those few extra months with her because of the prayers of this community. Thank you, Sal, Nina, and everyone so very much for that. Oh, Bill, thank you for writing that beautiful note, and may the soul of your Nana have a tremendous elevation in the world of souls. May her memory always be for a blessing. We say amen. Joe, the expression Job's comforters means that they're not really comforters. They made it worse, right? So beware of friends who try to explain to you why you're having terrible times in the midst of your terrible times. That's not the way to comfort a friend. The way to comfort a friend is to just be there with them and listen, be available to them, but not try to explain themselves to them. Jonathan, egg for mourners. I am lost on the connection to mourning. I understand the egg on Passover being about life. Is it the same here? I would say yes, right? Well, no, here, it's funny. No, because here the explanation is not that the egg is round and suggests the circle of life. Here they're saying that the connection of the egg to the mourner is that the egg has no opening, like the legume, like the lentil has no crack in it, unlike other legumes. So the egg is a closed object, and this is reminding us, that the mourner doesn't need to speak, and we don't need to speak. And when you visit a shiva, you don't greet people. And you don't speak to the mourner until he speaks or she speaks to you, right? And so it's a time for silence, unless the mourner feels like speaking, and then you take your cues from the mourner. So that's what the egg suggests, right? The roundness, the perfect circularity of the lentil suggests that circle of life. The egg, which is not, circular in that way, here they're saying it doesn't suggest the circle of life, it just suggests that silence. And Ilanit, I had no ideas. So much of the Sefer Iyov was quoted and discussed in Bava Basra. Is there any other single book that gets so many direct quotes and a long commentary? Wow. I think, right, in Tractate Megillah, we certainly look at the book of Esther at length. And then in the Midrash, wow, it really goes off just analyzing every line. But I'm not sure. Maybe this is certainly an extensive analysis of Job. And actually, I didn't mention it. Where we finished today, we finished chapter 1 of Tractate Bava Basra. So God willing, when we gather again tomorrow at the regular Friday time of noon Pacific, we will open chapter 2 of Tractate Bava Basra. Have a good night.